Hi, everyone. I'm Kathrine Switzer. I was the first woman to officially run the Boston Marathon, and I want to welcome you to Athletes of the World, Athlètes Mondiaux.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Athlètes Mondiaux podcast. Athlètes Mondiaux is French for Athletes of the World. In this podcast, I interview track and field athletes from all around the world in their native language when I speak it. My guests so far include Mondo Duplantis, Ashton Eden, Laura Muir, Steve Backley, Nafi Thiam, and many other amazing athletes. And my guest today is Kathrine Switzer, who was the first woman to officially run the Boston Marathon in 1967. Kathrine made history that day, and many of us have seen the picture of her being attacked by Jock Sample, the race co-director who didn't want women in his race. Kathrine could have walked away, but she didn't. She finished her marathon and went on to fight for other women's rights, helping to finally include the women's marathon in the Olympic Games in 1984. Kathrine also launched the 261 Fearless nonprofit dedicated to the inclusion of women in the world of running and sports. You're listening to the original interview in English, but the interview is also available dubbed in French if you understand French better than English. Enjoy! Hi, Kathrine. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matilda.
You and I met in 2019 in Dunkirk, in northern France, when the new track was named after you. How special was it for you to have a new track named after you?
It was really an amazing experience for me. One of the happiest days of my life because it represented the fact that after all these years, 50 years, I've been really recognized. And it was also an opportunity to realize that we were leaving a legacy for a lot of young girls and women.
And so few sport venues and stadiums are named after women. That is crazy.
You're absolutely right, Matilda. I actually haven't thought of that. But I remember when Billie Jean King, the tennis stadium in New York City was named after her. That was really terrific.
If I'm honest, I didn't know much about your story until I heard you speak that day in Dunkirk. I'd seen the picture with you and Jock Sample, but I didn't know much of your story. So that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast today. Are you tired of telling your story?
I'm not tired of telling the old story, Matilda, because people find it so fascinating. Yes, you're right. Everybody's seen the picture. It's ubiquitous. But sometimes when they meet me, they say, oh, you're the one in the picture. So I'm happy to tell it because, again, I want every little girl and young woman out there, and men too, to realize we've come a long distance, but we have a long distance to go. This isn't just about sports. This is about all of women's equality, women's rights, women's right to work, women's right to reproduction, everything. So it's a story that needs to be told again and again and again. And I'm happy to say, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but we've sold the rights for a feature film. I'm excited about the fact that maybe we will see it on the big screen and then it will become an even bigger story.
Yeah. How instrumental were your parents in you thinking that you could do anything you want despite being a girl?
You know, I can't thank them enough. And I almost start every speech thanking them by saying the story, telling the story, which is that my parents really gave me every opportunity in the world. And I often joke, I said I should have been the first woman president of the United States with all the empowerment I got from my parents, that I could do anything and overcome anything. And that's a joke, of course. But the reality is that children very, very much need opportunity. They're all talented. They all have gifts, but they don't know it. And you have to keep giving them the opportunity and telling them they are somebody. I think my parents saw in me that, you know, they had started me early in school. And so by the time I got to high school, I was only 12 years old. Everybody else was kind of grown up and dating, and I was still playing with dolls. And they gave me the opportunity to run and realize that that made me feel empowered. And I swear to you now, you know, I've been running for 62 years. This still is the daily run that gives me my sense of empowerment. It's like magic to me. And I can't stress enough how if parents would simply give their kid every opportunity to excel, take part, and believe in themselves, then they grow up empowered. And that makes all the difference.
Your dad wanted you to run and not be a cheerleader, right?
That's true, too. And my mother was, I don't want you hanging out with all those boys. You know, like at 12, I was going to hang out with boys. But my dad completely left that part out and said, you know what? Cheerleaders cheer for other people. You should have people cheering for you. So he always put me in the focus and said, you know, you're the one who's in charge here. So go out and run and have people cheer for you. He was full of all these amazing pieces of wisdom. And I suppose every parent does that or tries to throw down their pearls of wisdom, and you hope that the kids are going to pick them up. And my father said, the game is on the field, not on the sidelines, and life is to participate, not to spectate. And we've even made T-shirts out of that said, life is to participate, not to spectate. And it's true. It's true. You should be a participant in life. But most kids don't know how. You have to show them.
Did you like running from the very first time?
I loved running from the very first time because I didn't need a team or money or a uniform or to join a club. I could just go out and do it. And also I was a little bit shy. Only people I saw run were men, boys anyway, in school, and they were all good. I knew I was slow, but I could go for a long time. I wasn't exactly out there saying, look at me, look at me. But of course, the word spread very quickly because people saw me out running. And it was very funny in our neighborhood when I was growing up. There were people like the mailman and the milkman who would come to my mother, knock on the door, deliver the milk or the mail or whatever. And they would say, is your little girl okay? I see her out running. Because most people thought if you're running away from something. And my mother said, no, she's fine. She's just doing her training. So it was really, really good to get that support.
Did you have a coach back then?
No, not at all. But my father had said, we didn't realize it was going to be running that I did because women didn't run. I mean, the only time I ever remembered seeing women run was watching Wilma Rudolph on television in the Rome Olympics in 1960. And I thought she was fantastic, but I thought, I can't run fast. It seemed like a different thing to me. Mm-hmm. But my dad said, look, why don't you run and get in really good shape and you can make the field hockey team in your high school. We neither knew what field hockey was. We just knew it was a sport where girls ran. And by the time, I got there for training for field hockey, I was one of the best players because I never got tired and nobody could catch me and I could learn my skills very, very quickly. And that's when I had my first coach. And honestly, I hung on every word she said. She said, you hold the stick like this, not like this. I did everything exactly like she said. And I did become a pretty good player. In fact, I often say, if we had been 20 years on, I probably never would have become a runner. I think I would have tried very, very hard to be an Olympic field hockey player. I love that sport a lot. I love the team. I love the teamwork. And yet running I loved also because it was my time alone to meditate and to dream and to just let my mind go free. And there's many a day, even when I was only 12 and 13 years old, I would forget how many laps I had done. I was out there counting 7 laps every day equaled 1 mile. And sometimes it was like 8 or 9 or 10 because I couldn't remember.
And when did you first hear about the marathon?
I heard about the marathon when I was at university. I went to Syracuse University because, like you, I wanted to be a journalist. Syracuse has a very good journalism department. I knew I wasn't going to be able to play sports. We had sports in high school, but there were no sports. In fact, at Syracuse University, there's a major powerhouse of sports for men, had 25 sports for men and nothing for women. So I asked the men's track coach if I could run on the cross-country team with the men. And he said, no, you can't run officially. It's against the rules. But if you want to come and work out with the team, you'd be welcome. Well, of course, he didn't really believe I would show up. And he didn't really mean that sincerely because when I closed his office door, I heard him laughing to his colleagues, saying, she'll never show up. I'm glad I got rid of that one. And I was really angry. And so I felt I had to show up. And I did show up. And that's where I met a volunteer coach who had been out helping train the men in the cross-country team. He was a really older guy. He was like 50. And he was an ex-marathon runner. And he was really proud of me for showing up. He said, I've been here for 30 years. We've never had a girl. He said, I'm really excited about seeing you. And so we started running together, and he started telling me about the Boston Marathon. He'd run it 15 times and had finished in the top 10 at Boston, which is really a big deal. He just romanticized the marathon so much that I told him I wanted to run it. And then that changed everything. We argued and argued. He said, no woman can ever run a marathon. And I said, what? I said, we're running 10 miles a night now. And he said, 10 miles is not 26 miles. And I said, I know that, but if I can train up from 1 mile to 10 miles, I can train from 10 to 26. He said, no, you can't. A woman can't possibly do it. So we argued. And finally he said, look, I'll tell you what, if you show me in practice that you can do it, I'll take you to the Boston Marathon. And I just really knuckled down. We trained our brains out. And one day we ran the 42Ks, the 26 miles. And I thought we had measured the course wrong. I thought it was short. My coach said, no. It's long if it's anything. I said, no. I said, let's run another 8Ks. Let's run another 5 miles. And he said, you can go another 8Ks? I said, sure. Can't you? I feel great. And he said, okay. And we went out and he fainted at the end of the workout. He just passed out. And I was so excited. I was jumping around. When he came to, he said, women have hidden potential in endurance and stamina. We knew something was really interesting happening because in our training, the men on the cross country team would not come and train with us if we went longer than 15 or 20 Ks. And they said, you're crazy. We're not going to go that far. That's when I could keep up with the men. I couldn't run as fast as they could, but I could go the distance. So It was really a magical time of discovery. But it was then that I heard, obviously now I'm on the brink, right? I'm going to run the Boston Marathon. And at least that's what my coach said he would do. And indeed, the very next day, he showed up at my dormitory with the entry forms. And he said, okay, you got to fill these out. You got to enter officially. I said, why? I thought we could just kind of go up and jump in the race. And he goes, this is the Boston Marathon. You don't just go and jump in the race. It's like the Olympic Games. You have to follow the rules. You have to pay your entry fee. You see, a woman had jumped out of the bushes the year before I ran. And she ran really pretty well. And my coach didn't believe it. And I said, she really did. It was in all the newspapers. And he said, no. He said, you have to be official. It doesn't count unless you're official. So I filled out the entry form, but I signed my name, K.V. Switzer. And obviously the officials thought that I was a man and not a woman. It wasn't intentional. On my side, there was nothing in the rule book about it being a men's only race. Nothing at all. They just assumed a woman couldn't do it. Why would a woman want to enter the race? And there was nothing about gender on the entry form. There was a funny moment there, actually, when I signed the entry form. I went like this. I said to my coach, I said, if I go up to Boston with you and run with a number on my chest, I said, I'm going to be noticed because I didn't want to be noticed. I just wanted to go run. And he said, I know. And I'm proud of you. Isn't that amazing? I mean, You think of a guy who was then 51 years old, who had run the Boston Marathon 15 times. He had a name there. He had a reputation. And he was really putting himself on the line for a 20-year-old girl. At the time, it didn't seem exceptional, but I look back on it and I realize how astonishing it was.
Yeah.
I keep using him. His name is Arnie, because he passed away. But I keep using that as an example for being a good adult. All my life, I said, if Arnie was willing to do that for me, it's not going to be too difficult for me to help a lot of other people.
Yeah. Did Bobby Gibb, so the woman who had jumped out of the bush the year before was Bobby Gibb, did she inspire you? Did she help you believe it was possible?
I said, oh, great, it's been done. Obviously, a woman can do it. There's no problem. I'm just going to go and run it too. So I wasn't there to prove anything. Honestly, if I hadn't had a coach in my life who made me sign up for the race and I went by myself, I'd just probably take a bus to Boston, go out to Hopkinton, put on my sweatsuit and go out and jump in the race also. But, he insisted that I register. She didn't inspire me so much as I said, oh, yeah, great, it's been done. Of course, in hindsight, you have to look at the fact that, she took a big risk too.
Yeah. And how did you feel that day? Because I think you had no idea this day was going to change your life.
Definitely.
Would you have done it if you'd known what was coming?
It's hard to speculate because what happened is, obviously, you're leading up to this story, is that about 2K, almost 3Ks into the race, an official jumped off, the co-race director jumped off the official's bus and attacked me for running and tried to rip off my bib numbers and throw me out of the race. I was absolutely terrified. So I don't think I would like to experience that terror anymore. On the other hand, knowing what I know now in terms of the wisdom and the opportunities it has given me and other women, I would say, yes, that was a worthy thing to do. It wasn't easy. For many, many years, I had a lot of difficulties with people shaming me, telling me I did the wrong thing, spouting myths that women shouldn't do this, that women will never have children and they'll turn into men and they'll disgrace the feminine sex and they shouldn't sweat in public. They should stay home and make dinner for their husbands. All of this kind of stuff is what I had to put up with for a long, long time. But what it showed me is how resolute I could be and how absolutely fearless I could be. because I think a lot of people would be afraid of receiving hate mail, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And when I receive piles of hate mail, you're going to fry in hell, God doesn't want you to do this type of mail. Then there was fan mail of people saying, yay, that's great. I put your picture on our fireplace. We look at it every day. One woman said, it's on my refrigerator. And every time I open the refrigerator, I think of you. And instead I go out for a run. Millions of funny things. So yes, I would have done that, but I would have been very, very frightened.
Tell us about your 261 moment.
261, that's the bib that I wore in the race. We have come to create a nonprofit, a global nonprofit for women, using running as a method to become empowered. That's the short mission of the nonprofit. Nonprofit's called 261 Fearless. It came around being that name because so many people heard the story and were using the number 261 on their own bibs, on their back, on their arms, inking it or tattooing it, if you can imagine, because as they said, it makes them feel fearless. And running itself had changed their lives. Because just about everybody in the whole world has been told you're not good enough and you can't do something. And when you go run, you realize you can do anything. That's how they were relating to 261. But later we realized everybody also has a 261 moment. It's the moment when, if you will, somebody tries to rip off your bib and tell you you can't do it, or you don't belong, or you're really faced with a very, very difficult decision or a fearful challenge. And then you see it through and you realize that that's the moment that everything in your life changed, that you could do anything, that you're no longer afraid in the face of adversity. I mean, you're healthily afraid. I would say definitely when that official attacked me, it was a 261 moment. But if you were to tell me then that this is your 261 moment, I would never have believed it. Matilda, a lot of people say to me, you were destined for that moment. The collision was perfect of you wearing the bib, of the official being there, and the press truck being right in front of us. Honestly, it was coincidence. You couldn't have planned this in a million years. But here's the point. The point is it did happen. And I was not destined for that moment. That was coincidence. What is destiny is what you do with it afterwards. And I could have walked off the course because I was so frightened. I really was embarrassed. I was frightened, but also I was determined. And I was determined no matter what, I was going to finish the race. And that's when I told my coach, I'm finishing on my hands and my knees if I have to. That is the definitive moment, is when you make that decision.
Yeah.
So I was really happy. All these years later, I was very, very happy that that happened to me because it changed my life in a very positive way. I could tell you about, my career and organizing and being in corporate marketing and sports marketing and broadcasting, et cetera, and all those breathless, frightening moments, 2-1 live, 40 million people listening, or walking into a boardroom with all men and they're going to make a decision on what my program is going to be like. And I'm the only woman. And I always take a deep breath and I always say, I ran the Boston Marathon with a gorilla jumping on my back, telling me to get out of the race. None of them have done that. And I'm not afraid of this moment at all.
This race was just the beginning because you didn't stop there.
Exactly. First of all, if I stopped there, I would have fulfilled everybody's next expectations because the press truck was shouting at me, what are you doing? You don't belong here. When are you going to quit? Everybody wanted me to quit because that's what they thought women did, is that they barged into places where they were not welcome and they couldn't do it anyway. So they wanted me to quit. That would prove them right. And so when I didn't quit, they said, oh, it's just a joke, isn't it? It's a one-off. You're never going to do it again. And I remember because I can't imagine how feisty I must have been. I didn't think I was. I thought I was a perfectly reasonable person. But I read my quotes in the newspaper when I wrote my book, Marathon Woman. I went back and read them, 50 years later. And I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. One journalist said, this is a joke, isn't it? You're never going to run another marathon. And I looked at him and I said, someday you're going to read about a little old lady who's 80 years old and she drops dead in Central Park out training. I said, that woman is going to be me. I'm going to run for the rest of my life. And of course, I've run hundreds of races and 42 marathons. And the biggest triumph I had actually was running the Boston Marathon itself 50 years later on my anniversary, which was huge for me. And disproving all those people, because everyone wanted to try so hard to say that I wasn't going to be able to do it or women couldn't. So that was important.
You didn't do it just for yourself.
Definitely not. There were two things that happened in the Boston Marathon. One was that incident. The second was at the 34-kilometer mark in Boston. You go over Heartbreak Hill. That's when you're on fumes. You're just hanging on by your fingernails. And it's a wonderful time, if you can stand it, because all of the ideas and visions and things that you had pre-notions about go out the window and new stuff comes into your head. It's a wonderfully creative time. And I realized suddenly it wasn't the official's fault that the attack happened, because he's a product of his time. And that's the only thing he knew. He was defending his race. And of course, it came out as personal hatred to me, but I was just symbolic of the situation.
Right.
So my job was to change his attitude. But the second thing is then I was wondering, why aren't there other women here? What's wrong with the women was my first reaction. To my shame, I said, what's wrong with these other women? There wasn't anything wrong with them. They were afraid because they had believed all the myths. They'd been told they were going to turn into a man. They had been told it was unseemly. They had been told that they were not capable and that if they did something, it was dangerous. Therefore, they were afraid. And if I could show them that it was wonderful, that they would be healthy, they would be full of achievement and empowerment, that was my next job. So when I crossed the finish line, I had those two things in my mind. First of all, I forgave the old official. The second thing is I need to do is become a better athlete, because I knew people then would say, well, it didn't count. She only ran 4 hours and 20 minutes. That's a jogging time. Anybody can do that, right? People constantly diminish your achievement. Please don't be discouraged out there. And the third thing is that somehow I was going to have to change the situation and create opportunities for women. I didn't know what that looked like, but I started local, which is important for everybody to remember. You can't take on the whole world. If you've only got a sprinkling can, you just better water your own garden first. And so I started locally, putting a club together, creating events, learning how to do marketing and public relations on a local level, and then started taking part in the governance of my sport, of attending meetings, of putting together legislation, working with other women, took my journalism degree to the master's level, and then went to Munich to work as a journalist because I wanted to see how the inner workings worked. This all takes a lot of time and money. Did that and learned then what the secret was going to be. And the secret was going to be is to create events for women that are welcoming and non-intimidating, and they will come and run. I had good writing skills because I went to a very good journalism school, and I put a business proposal together. I was going to send it out to a lot of different companies because I knew that sponsorship would work, that if we could get sponsorship for these events, we couldn't just stage them without that. I wrote a proposal. I took it first to Avon Cosmetics, which was then the world's largest cosmetics company. It was experimental pitch proposal. Very long, very detailed. But I decided I would start with something and then refine it. It was one of those amazing moments in your life when I took it to this executive at Avon. We had a chat. It was late in the afternoon. And he said, I'm going to read this tonight. And I said, nah, it's too long to read tonight. You'll read it tomorrow. But there's an executive summary there. You can read that. The next morning, early, like 10 to 9, in my office, my phone rang and it was him. And he said, I stayed up all night. I read that proposal, 40 pages. He said, look, I don't think our company's ever going to do anything with running. But he said, I love the way you think. What would it take to have you come work with us? I thought, is this a real phone call or is this guy, putting me up? So I made a joke. I said, wouldn't be difficult. And I just doubled my salary because I knew he was never going to hire me. And he said, I don't think that would be a problem. I said, what? I went in for an interview and I got the job. He said, we probably won't do anything with running. I want you to help us with our fledgling tennis program. And I said, okay, well, at least it's women's sports.
Yeah.
So I got in there and I begged them for one race, just one race. And it was huge. It was just electrifying. It was in every TV network that night, front page of the New York Times, Sports Illustrated, everything. So all the bosses came to me and said, wait a minute, you're onto something really cool. What do you have in mind? I said, we should go global. We're the world's largest cosmetics company. And to cut a long story short, we eventually did 400 races in 27 countries for over 1 million women. And we had the data and statistics from those races to take to the International Olympic Committee to campaign for a women's marathon in the Olympic Games. People thought I was crazy, absolutely crazy, because the longest event in the Olympic Games had just been put in, 1,500 meters, and you're going to have women do a marathon? No, 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 no. And so many countries said, we couldn't possibly do this. Women's uteruses are going to fall out. This is really scary. Well, fortunately, with a big company, we could afford to get some medical evidence put together. And we had these guys who did the medical, doctors also who ran in particular, and they discovered that actually long distance running was ideally suited for women. Not so much the shot put or the high hurdles, although they deserve that too, whatever they want to do.
Right.
But actually what they were really good at on a comparable level was long distance running. So we met with the IOC people. I worked closely with them, especially Peter Ruberoff, the head of the Los Angeles Olympic Organizing Committee. And we got the women's marathon voted in 1981 for 1984 games. It was an exceptional vote. And I'll never forget your wonderful French woman, Monique Berliou, who was then the executive director of the International Olympic Committee. She made the announcement and she said, this was not an easy decision, but she said it's a very important one. And I was like, yes! So anyway, who would have imagined that? People say, well, how did you come up with all those ideas? And I said, well, listen, I trained my brains out to become a good athlete also. I eventually improved to 2 hours, 51 minutes, which at the time was world-class time. And that was so exciting, really, to have your own body be able to do something you never thought was physically possible. While I was training, though, I utilized those long runs where I got lost in space. And I would focus on one issue of this proposal, one thing. How am I going to create the opportunity? How am I going to create that race? I'd come in all sweaty and I'd quickly write down, the solution and put it in a box. And when it came time to write the proposal, the answers were in the box.
How did you feel when you saw Joan Benoit get into the LA Coliseum? So she's the first ever female Olympic champion in the marathon.
Yes.
How did it make you feel?
By that time, I was hired by ABC to do the broadcast of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that was a very, very emotional moment for me. But I was there as not a neutral person, but I was there as an international person. So my focus was as much on Ingrid Christensen and Greta Weitz and Rosa Moda as it was on Joan Benoit Samuelson. And I was really thinking that Joan Benoit, she was either going to go spectacularly well or she probably wasn't going to finish because she had just had a very serious knee surgery. And everybody was convinced that it couldn't hold up on the hard concrete roads. When she started as fast as she started, it was one of those almost suicidal races. And we all thought, can she possibly hold this pace? And Greta Weitz was holding back. And then when Greta Weitz decided to make her move, it was a perfect time to make the move. But by that time, Joan was gone. If it had been another way, that where Joan Benoit began to slow down, Greta would have caught her past her and she would have won. And everybody would have said, oh, Benoit started too fast and Greta Weitz is a genius. See, this is the thrill of sport. And Greta herself said, I called it wrong. I couldn't believe she was going to hold that pace. She never was bitter about it. But how did I feel is the question. I had always said before the races, when any runner, Joan or whoever it is, comes through the tunnel and into the stadium, that's the first time the world will really understand. And indeed, she was in that dark tunnel, and then she came into this hot, white light stadium, and the crowd, 95,000 people, were just screaming their heads off. And it was such a thrilling moment, because not only were they understanding what this meant for women, but 2.2 billion people around the world were watching it on television. Everybody knows how far 42.2 kilometers is, or 26.2 miles, because we've all ridden or driven the car over the distance, or ridden our bikes, or ridden a donkey, or walked it in some countries. And now here were women running it. And I've said this before, it was like giving women the right to vote, because 50 years before, it was our intellectual and social acceptance. This is our physical acceptance. The marathon is the longest running event in the Olympic Games for men or for women. It represented the equal playing field. So it was the physical acknowledgement. I thought that was so very, very, very important. So you asked me how I felt. It was pretty overwhelming. It was pretty overwhelming. And it was overwhelming for about a week, 10 days, let's say. And you say, that's it? And I say, no, for the rest of my life. But you know what happens? It's like anybody who runs a marathon and they have a personal best, they get so excited. Or when you finish a book at last, you launch it. Oh my God, after all that work. Or have a baby, okay? You go into a postpartum depression.
Yeah.
After all that work, after weeks and months and years, and you say, oh my God. And for me, what I thought is, it's very good that we got the women's marathon in the Olympics. That's changing the way we think about women in sport. But what about all of those women out there who don't have any opportunities, who are restricted by social or religious convention, poverty, myth, who are not allowed in education, not even allowed to go out of the house, not allowed to choose their partners? And that's when the idea for 261 Fearless happened. Because that woman, you think, oh, she's under a burqa in Afghanistan, But you know what? She's just as likely to be your next door neighbor. You don't know that. But what you can do is constantly reach out with a helping hand and say, hey, why don't you join us? Let's go for a walk. Let's go for a run. How are you today? And when people start walking and jogging together, they completely free themselves of the restrictions. It's really, really amazing. So that's where we got the idea also for 261 Fearless, that there was this huge, huge pool of women who could benefit from the educational benefits and the empowering benefits of a simple walk or jog together. There you go.
Do you think some of these women were sometimes scared to run because they also saw Gabriela Anderson-Keys, who was really struggling to finish? Because in her memoir, Dina Castor says that she'd seen Gabriela Anderson-Keys struggle. And I quote, "A race that causes that much distress can be good for you," I thought. That's what she thought when she saw that. Do you think it did some damage?
Definitely. And particularly, if you don't mind my saying so, the French press were unmerciful about it. They kept putting full-page spreads of her struggling, but not full-page spreads of Joan Benoit winning. It was, once again, women can't do it. Well, the very next day, Gabrielle Anderson called a press conference and said, hey, look, my mind was all there, but physically I was gone. I was totally dehydrated. She said, I knew that was the finish line. She said, but I knew I was having difficulties getting there. Anybody can get heat exhaustion. Anybody can, but it didn't help.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was really depressed over it for a while because I thought, is this going to restrict now? Are they going to withdraw the women's marathon? Because in 1928, there was an incredible fabrication that women collapsed at the end of the 800 meters, which was a new race in the Olympic Games. As it turns out, my husband, Roger Robinson, who is a noted historian and author, completely went back and debunked that myth and found that tapes and film had been adulterated to make it look like these women had collapsed. They hadn't. It was a fabrication of the press to say these women were incapable and that the event should be withdrawn, that they were a disgrace to womanhood. And the 800 meters in 1928 was withdrawn until 1960, till the Rome Olympics. I was afraid that might happen with the marathon, but fortunately not. If a man had collapsed, he would have been a hero.
Yeah, true.
And now, when people finish races, fast ones, they all sprawl on the track. Well, men were sprawling on the track long before women were sprawling on the track. And they were all heroes. Oh, they ran their hearts out.
Yeah. It's getting better, right? I mean, there's still a lot to do, of course, but...
Definitely. And the performances that women are producing now, the potential for what's happening in terms of endurance is absolutely phenomenal for women. I mean, the women are winning the big ultra races, 100-milers, and now that they're getting so fast in the marathon itself, it predicts an astonishing new level of sport. And what it is also doing is changing people's minds totally about women's capability. And I think also then men's capability. We are realizing that the human capacity is beyond anything we can imagine.
So you ran the Boston Marathon again 50 years later in 2017. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think around half of the participants were women then?
Yes, and that was one reason why I was so excited. It was, as I say, the happiest day of my life because technically it was half and half. It was 49% women and 51% men, but it's close, okay? It was 50-50. The difference in the spectators, everybody knew the story. Instead of saying, go home and make dinner for your husband, they were holding up signs that said, go 261. They're holding up their kids. I hugged every kid that was up there, and did 13 interviews and still finished in a time that was only 24 minutes slower than when I ran in 50 years before. I think one of the most significant moments was that when I came down to the finish line, I looked down and I saw the person holding the medal for me was a woman named Joanne Flaminio, who was the first woman president of the Boston Athletic Association in 135 years. There were also 125 women who had signed up to run with me as part of Team 261 Fearless. And that was really, really exciting because their charity bibs really gave us the financial backing to launch 261 Fearless globally. So it was an astonishing day.
Do you understand why sometimes people want to set you against Bobby Gibb? Like, who is the real pioneer? You're both pioneers in your own ways. You did different things.
Yeah, definitely. I had no idea in 1967 that she was in the race. And of course, what a stupid thing not to think that she would be in the race. And she ran well, and she ran an hour faster than I did. Of course, she didn't get attacked in the race like I did either.
Yeah.
Look, to take nothing away from her, she's an artist, she's a sculptor, she's very, very good at what she does. We're completely different personalities. But what can I say? The photograph of the incident with me went around the world. And indeed, it changed history, women's history. It changed my life. But before Bobby Gibb, there were 6 or 7 other women who ran marathons, and they ran them really quite well, including one from New Zealand who ran a 3:14 marathon world record. So who really is the first pioneer? I think it doesn't matter. The difference is who does what with what they've been given. And I couldn't let mine rest. It was very, very important for me to push ahead.
Yeah. You worked as a broadcaster? Because I saw when I Googled your name, I found pictures of you interviewing FloJo and Carl Lewis. So tell us about that.
I broadcast probably network broadcasting I did, I think, 2 Olympic Games. I did Los Angeles, I did Seoul, and several U.S. championships and Olympic trials. Then for the New York City Marathon, I believe I did the broadcast of the New York City Marathon about 20 times. And I certainly did the Boston Marathon broadcast for 42 consecutive years. And many other local races, but those are the big ones. And then I decided to retire in 2018. And everybody said, no, you can't retire now. And I said, yes, I can, because there's going to come a day you're going to tell me to retire. But broadcasting, I always found, if you want to know the truth, ultimately unsatisfactory. Television coverage of the major events is fantastic to see it up close. And certainly when I was in a motorcycle alongside of some of the greatest athletes in the world, like in the New York City Marathon, it was phenomenal. A great privilege to be there that close. But ultimately, you've got, 3 or 4 seconds or 15 seconds to say something. When you have, as you can tell, I talk a lot. I got a lot to say. I just felt I was never really very good at broadcasting. So ultimately decided I really didn't want to do it anymore, because it's no fun doing something that you feel you're really not good at, regardless of what people say. So I'd rather write books and write articles and talk to you.
Are you writing another book?
Not actively right now, but I will.
Okay. And tell us more about the movie.
Well, basically the movie is based on the book Marathon Woman. And we're going to really try to focus not just on that Boston incident, because that was the spark of the revolution, but to really stress all the intricacies of women's achievements and getting ahead and getting into the Olympic Games. That's the real story. There are many great ideas for films, and finding the financing and the right people, the right director and the right actress to come together all at the same time is really quite an art. I certainly wouldn't want to be in that business. So that's where we are right now.
And do you know who's going to be you?
I know who they want to be me,
Okay.
but she hasn't signed the deal yet. But we'll see.
Okay.
I can't tell you who it is.
Oh, of course. But so you're involved in all
Well,
of
yeah.
the
I mean, I'm
decisions.
involved all the time. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's especially difficult with the script because the script also always wants to be a shorter version of the longer story. And therefore you have to watch very carefully with the facts. But in my opinion, fact is always more interesting than fiction. So there's no point in fictionalizing a story that's already good and important to be factual.
Right. What's your take on the current state of the running industry with the apps and the new shoes?
Yeah, it's a funny time right now. What I despair is the lack of good media, really good running publications. There are very few of them now. And I also find a huge disparity between the quality level of the sport and this mass of joggers. I mean, I love the joggers. I love the ordinary people. I love how running changes ordinary lives. But I personally am old-fashioned. So I get very frustrated with equipment, apps, watches, heart rate monitors, all of these gears and gadgets. And in fact, I refuse to carry a phone when I run, which is probably stupid in some cases. The only thing I wear is a watch, and the only reason I wear a watch is to know, how long I've been out and when I'm coming back. The thing I worry about is that there is a body of athletes, men and women, who are incredibly, incredibly good. And then there's this yawning gap of emptiness. Even in a race, you see the elites go by, and then you wait minutes sometime for anybody who's kind of a medium class or up and coming runner. And then there's this horde of just ordinary people runners, which is fine. There's 50,000 of them doing great work for charities, often creating great excitement in the cities. But to finish 50th in the New York City Marathon, for instance, now the 50th time the New York City Marathon would have been something like, 500th then. So there's that, as I say, after the elites, there's this yawning gap. I'd like to see more development is what I would like to see.
Mm-hmm. It's super hard to relate to all of these fast times. Some people are getting so fast.
Yeah.
It's like a different world.
It's
a different sport.
But it's great. It's interesting, that the times in the 100 meters hasn't changed much. But in the marathon, it's overwhelming. And again, the future is going to be very exciting.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite place to run beside Boston?
You mean for a race?
Just to run.
Oh, no. Okay. Boston is my favorite place to go for a marathon. But my favorite place to run, I have two. One is in Hudson Valley of New York. There are incredible paths on some of the beautiful preserves there and along cliffs, and just the vistas are fantastic. And where I'm right now, where I'm doing this interview from in New Zealand, is really, really amazing. Right outside of my house, I have paths that, even though I am in the city, the paths cut through all of the green spaces that are through the city. And from my house, I could go all the way down a path and be completely remote and even come out on the seafront, which is just astonishing. And New Zealand is very, very aware of its natural beauty and that protects it. But at the same time, it creates accessibility for people to run, to walk, to mountain bike through it without damaging it, which is great.
Right. So I have one final question. That is the question I ask all of my guests. The podcast is called Athlètes Mondiaux, so Athletes of the World, because what I love the most about track and field is that it is a truly universal sport. What is the one thing that you love the most about track and field? Doesn't have to be the same thing, can be anything.
Well, Matilda, I really have to agree with you. I think that the greatest thing about track and field and even long distance running is that there's something for everybody. Here in New Zealand, for instance, she's one of my greatest heroes anyway, is Valerie Adams, who is the incredible, incredible shot putter and who is really, really big and really, really tall. She's the only woman I've ever interviewed where I had to put the microphone up over my head or I stand on a bench to interview her. And she is personable. She's feisty. She trains her brains out. She's a mom. But where would a place for Valerie Adams have been in 1920 or 28? She wouldn't have had a sports opportunity. Similarly, in high jump, the women who are in high jumps, they look like Paris runway models. Their legs are so long. They're fabulous. They glamorize the sport also, even with pole vaulting. It's amazing. So what I'm saying is yes, some are flexible, some are big, some are tiny. And there's something for everybody. There really is. In long distance running also, there's something for everybody. I see people all sizes. To be good at the sport, probably there's an optimum height-weight ratio. There's kind of enormous cardiovascular capability. But basically, anybody on my entire street can go out and put one foot in front of the other and train up to run a marathon and be a participant in life, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So I hope we get to see you in Paris in 2024 with the marathon in Paris. That'll be great.
I look forward to it.
People will be able to run as well. The population will be involved.
Oh,
so
really?
They want the Olympic marathon to be as inclusive as possible. There are rules, but they want the marathon to be inclusive.
How interesting. If that's true, maybe it's incentive to start training up really. Listen, it would be my dream to run in the Olympic marathon. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Anything you'd like to add?
No, Matilda, I want to thank you for doing a great job, for having me on the show, for stressing women today. And I guess the last thing I would like to say is that everybody raise your daughters to be brave, fearless. Raise your sons to be respectful and fearless. And how we can work together using running as a real uniter around the world of world peace, inclusivity, diversity, equality, and respect.
Thank you. And that's it for today. Kathrine, if you're listening, thank you so much for your time. And to all of you listening, I hope you liked the episode. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to support the podcast, please check the link in the description. I'll be back soon with another episode. Bye-bye.